am pleased to tell you that we do not have to recreate the Civilian Conservation Corps. The CCC is alive, and there are some implications that relate to subtitles C and D of the Act that I would like to share with you. As we sit here today, there are 10,000 young people wearing Corps uniforms and working on projects both in wilderness areas and in the middle of our inner cities, including Los Angeles. This summer, another 10,000 young people will join their ranks when the Summer Youth Corps programs begin. The CCC was effective in the 1930s, and the contemporary version of the Civilian Conservation Corps is working just as well today in 20 states and 45 cities and counties around the country. Both Senators Kennedy and Wofford gave wonderful descriptions of youth corps, along with Tony Fairbanks from Philadelphia, so I won't go into great detail about what each one looks like. I'll just provide a quick overview. There are 65. The oldest and largest is California. There are 12 new ones operating under a national demonstration called the Urban Corps Expansion Program. And there's a new one right here in D.C. called the D.C. Service Corps. It will celebrate its first anniversary this summer. Collectively, the Corps right now provide approximately 20,000 young people aged 16 to 23, both urban and rural, both men and women, with a combined educational and public service experience through year-round and summer programs. Today's Corps truly are the contemporary version of the CCC. The Corps give young adults, most of whom did not fare well in the traditional educational system, a second chance at developing the academic, employment, and life skills they need to move into the workforce and become productive citizens. I must add that sometimes I think that the Corps don't really give many youngsters a second chance. They are often the first chance that young Corps members have. The first family, the first safe place that they've ever been in their lives, where there is discipline, predictability, accountability, and a sense of expectation and hope. It is no wonder that many Corps members want to stay on after completing their first year. We wish they could. As has been noted, each Corps member performs hundreds of hours of valuable community service work. A number of the speakers today have already itemized the kinds of projects that they're involved in. But when I listened to the first panel, the senators talking about the cultural contributions that the WPA made, I am reminded of one Corps in Milwaukee, which has youngsters volunteering, doing their public service work at the Milwaukee Repertory Theater. So while many Corps members are out landscaping, renovating housing, or doing natural resource management work, the range of activities is very broad. Some of our young people in Milwaukee are designing costumes, building sets, and developing an appreciation for the arts. This extra dimension of public service makes the Corps more than just employment and training. It turns young people into resources and not problems. My message to you today regarding the Community Works Progress Act is a simple one. We deeply appreciate and fully support the intent of the legislation and the principles of work and service that are behind it. However, just as the contemporary CCC is working, we think that the contemporary WPA will work too. We worry, though, about setting up new administrative structures to administer the youth service programs under subtitles C and D of the Act. I was reminded by today's Washington Post about the difficulties that the administration is now encountering in launching its Weed and Seed initiative. New structures take a while to set up. As you and your colleagues consider how best to expand job and public service opportunities for young people, we strongly urge that you factor the vehicles that already exist, including the state and local Corps, into your plans. The existing youth service and conservation Corps are in place. They are addressing the same kinds of young people and doing essentially what the Subtitle D National Youth Community Corps program proposes to do, although not necessarily in residential centers. The existing youth corps have a mix of state and local public support, private foundation support, a broad base of funding. Many are already linked into the existing JTPA network. The youth corps are well established in their communities. They could start tomorrow to easily double the number of young people and then go on from there. In his eloquent address to the Senate back on May 12th, and then again today, Senator Wofford pointed out the vast potential of the Commission on National and Community Service. We echo his remarks and recommend that you consider the Commission as a partner in your efforts. It already has a mandate that truly complements your goal of bringing together the needs of employment and training for young people and the needs of the communities in which they live. It also has an administrative structure that could put out additional federal funds in a rapid and orderly fashion. As we look to pass solutions, such as the WPA and the CCC, to model new solutions, we ask that some of the existing solutions, including the Youth Service and Conservation Corps, are not overlooked. Again, thank you for your leadership. We look forward to working with you and your staff and the rest of the subcommittee members in great detail on this initiative.
We thank you. How are the young people in your project selected?
There are a variety of recruitment procedures. Some are recruited through the schools, others, in fact, most probably through word of mouth. And sometimes the various public employment agencies will refer young people to the corps. So and sometimes the staff themselves go out and speak at gatherings of young people at other community centers. Many of our programs are oversubscribed. There are waiting lists. And what we find is that at the end of the year, we have to kick our corps members out the door. So we could easily handle twice the number of young people as we're able to serve now.
But do you have, for example, here in Washington, a program?
Yes, the the D.C. Service Corps.
If, in fact, we were to pick Washington as one of the 3 urban areas, it would not just be an expansion of 2 or 3 times, but many times.
Exponentially, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you think you could move in that direction?
Oh, certainly. Certainly.
All right.
Some of the corps serve up to 500 youngsters and are limited only because of the level of funding. They could easily double. Even the smallest ones could take on significant numbers of young people.
And practical suggestions that you may have, and some of you have given those practical suggestions we would welcome. Ms. Sweeney mentioned a very practical problem, and I don't know the answer, but we're brainstorming here. And that is, in order not to make the appropriation for this too high, what we are doing is tacking on. In other words, you get the check for, let's say, AFDC, and then you would get an additional check here. Now, ideally, I agree with Ms. Sweeney, it'd be nice just to get that check for the job instead of getting that welfare check. We've discussed this. To get the full check, however, we would have to make an appropriation for the full amount, not the additional amount, not the increment there. And that creates problems in getting a bill passed over on the Senate floor. I don't know. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, yes. And I'm not sure that's true, though, because if you I guess the problem would be that right now part of it's funded through the states. The AFDC recipient has his benefit is a match between state and federal money. And so if you were to pick up the entire piece of it and not have the states contribute their share, you would have a bigger appropriation.
That is one problem. You'd have a bigger appropriation because of that. And the total would not be, aside from that state part, would not be greater. But in terms of an immediate appropriation, we will have to pass this bill. It becomes appreciably greater. And that's a very practical problem. It may be one we just can't get around. I agree with you in theory.
Even if there's a way to use the funds from the AFDC program to have those monies somehow transferred to you for the paycheck? I mean, isn't there a...
I don't know. There may be some way.
It's been years since I've been involved in the work and welfare stuff, but there were a number of demonstrations that I had some responsibility for years ago where through the Section 1115 waiver procedure in the Social Security Act, you could convert benefits into wages and be able to accommodate what it sounds like the dilemma is. Now, whether you can do that on the unemployment compensation side of the equation equally or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the President the President has indicated a strong interest in granting waiver requests this year.
Yeah. You also mentioned one other thing, and the education part of this is David Bourne's suggestion, which I think is an excellent one. I think Harry Reid is correct. We're improving this thing as we move along. But it is also true that for people of limited income, to say later on when you go to school you're going to get $10,000 for each year you have here, that becomes not as immediate as that need that they have right now. It may be that if we could even give a small, what do you get under your program? What are people paid?
The average stipend is $100 a week. Sometimes it's cast as minimum wage at an hourly rate, but by and large across the corps it's about $100 a week.
Yeah. I don't know. $100 a week would get you up pretty close. The amount you get at the minimum wage 4 days a week is $535 a month. We face another problem here, and I'm tossing out the problems, and I don't know any way around this one. I wrote it down here. What did I? Anyway, in the state of Alabama, your three-person family gets $124 now. That family going to $535, that's a huge amount of help. On the other hand, and this gets into your, Ms. Sweeney, when you say people doing the same job, in the alphabet right after Alabama is the state that pays the most, Alaska. Family of three gets $891. You add a 10% increment, and you have a huge differential. Now, in fact, the federal government is investing more in Alabama than in Alaska, but you do have a great disparity in what is being paid. Now, in fairness, the cost of living in Alaska is much greater than it is in Alabama. But do you see this as a great problem, or Mickey Couse, you're frowning? I don't know what that means.
Well, food stamps do make up much of the difference. So I think probably in Alabama, the person gets about $300 a month, something like that, in food stamps. So it's not that much of an increment to go up to $535. I think it's a problem mainly as I see it, in high benefit states where in California, I calculated that if the 10% were added to just the AFTC portion, not the food stamps, this job would be the equivalent of a $5.50 an hour job, which is considerably greater than is available in the minimum wage. So you create that disincentive that Roosevelt didn't want to create when he set the WPA wage, tried to set it below the lowest private sector wage. Fortunately, there are only 13 states, I'm told, where that's true, where the AFTC is above the minimum wage. Unfortunately, one of them is California, which is a gigantic state. I think my impression is these problems are quite difficult, which is why in my book, what I call for is some sort of system by which the welfare check would actually end, and a paycheck would then follow in train. So you wouldn't have to worry about gearing the paycheck to the welfare check. You could either time limit welfare benefits or do something where the person would be out of the welfare system entirely and wouldn't be comparing this job she's getting in the WPA with what her welfare check used to be, because the welfare check wouldn't be there anymore. I think eventually that's the system that we're going to have to gravitate to. The difficulties involved in this first step seem probably surmountable, but they're genuine difficulties.
Mr. Slobig, you've had experience in this whole area, and you mentioned you were concerned about being set up with a PIC program. One of the pluses, as we talked about this, is you bring a group of people aboard who see the benefits in terms of garnering some public support. There are some minuses to it. But one of the other things we have in here, in order to avoid the criticism that Senator Thurmond made about the cost, is a 10% limitation on administration. Is that realistic, or is it not?
The National Community Service Act has a 5% limit on administration. JTPA, if I believe, I can't remember, Brian, what is it, 15? 15, and we're moving it up. 15 to one part, 20 in another. The way the National Community Service Act Subtitle C programs, which the Youth Corps parts of this, or at least the full-time, year-round Youth Corps part of this would be akin to, are being administered by designated lead agencies that the governors have chosen. I mean, there's a very interesting array of administrative relationships that are in itself going to be an interesting experiment to watch evolve in the states. I mean, the governors could have chosen all human services agencies, they could have chosen job training agencies, they could have chosen whomever they chose, and they ended up with about a dozen of them being held in the governor's offices themselves in some kind of existing task force coordinating vehicle that crosses departmental lines, so that they consciously had a vehicle for a much more deliberative, collaborative relationship at the state level. In about a dozen, the departments of education are taking the lead. In about a dozen, some existing state office of voluntarism or voluntary action or whatever it's called has the lead. In 4 or 5, the Employment and Training Agency has the lead. But all of them had the opportunity to apply for and compete for Youth Corps funding under the Act. The Commission is about to make they've made their decisions. They haven't made public their grant awards because they're currently negotiating the bottom lines with each of the states. But they've made decisions to grant Youth Corps funding to 30 states. Now, those 30 states are probably going to have, I would guess, at least 8 to 10 different administrative entities at the state level that will be responsible for at least the fiscal administration, if not the programmatic administration of those funds. It says to us that you can do it expeditiously and not necessarily be locked into any given administrative entity. The concern, quite frankly, that I have as an old employment and training professional about the current JTPA system is that it has gotten so far away from this type of programming, except in places like Pennsylvania and a couple of other states where they're doing some things that are akin to and not nearly at the level that Pennsylvania has done it, that the difficulty is that you're going to be forced with the dilemma of trying to get an enormous big bureaucracy to change its thinking and behavior and way of acting. I'm not saying you can't do it. You can. But going back and looking at some of the lessons from old Title II and VI of old CETA days, and even before that, the old Emergency Employment Act, the old Public Employment Program stuff, suggests to me that it may be a high-risk, high-gain option, but I would not discount the possibility of using the administrative structure that the Commission on National Community Services set up to expeditiously move this stuff, at least the youth parts of it. I even boldly in my statement at the end of it suggest that you may want to even consider it for the adult job creation dimensions of it. Now that may sound totally wacky and off the wall, and yet what we're trying to accomplish, it seems to me, is both attitudinal and philosophical as well as programmatic. We're asking people to look at disengaged individuals, adults and youth, in a different way. We're asking people to look at them as an extension of our human resource system, at least as I see it. These are people that, of and by themselves, depending on how they're organized and programmed, can make a significant difference. The problem, quite frankly, that I would have philosophically and programmatically with the JTPA system taking this over is that, quite frankly, JTPA operates out of a deficit model. They don't see people the same way that folks in the national and community service arena see people.
I might add, we hope to change that a little with the new JTPA
Right.
bill. But what, and I'm just thinking out loud, what if we said you use the PIC administrative structure unless a governor or a mayor chooses another option, and then let them set up some other option which would have to be approved by the Secretary of Labor or someone?
It's possible.
All right, you mentioned also, and I can't read my own handwriting here, something about targeting.
Yeah, the provisions in the school-conditioned youth service part of your bill is targeted. I mean, there are 5 categories of young people that would be eligible for participation. If you accepted the notion of trying to integrate it more closely into the K-12 part of the National Community Service Act, you have a mismatch. That's non-targeted. You can make an argument and a case for targeting either way, and once again, as an old JTPA person, I've grown to detest targeting, quite frankly. I know it's a sensitive issue up here, but quite frankly, my experience has been that when you end up focusing on providing programs for poor kids, all too often the programs end up being viewed, maybe not really, but they become, quite frankly, perceived and viewed as poor programs.
This is one of the reasons we have a requirement that everyone in the program isn't going to be, on welfare, so that we can avoid that
Right.
that kind of a public relations stigma. Any final words of wisdom from Ms. Sweeney? You have wisdom for us.
I'm not sure if it's wisdom, but I just wanted to point out that the disparities that you point out, Senator, between AFTC levels in different states, there really is a problem within a state when you have somebody getting a much higher unemployment comp benefit than an AFTC benefit, and that may actually be much more troubling than the disparities across state lines.
Though across state lines, if you live in Gary, Indiana, or East Chicago, Indiana, and just across the line in Illinois, people are being paid appreciably more for the same work. There are going to be problems between states, but some of these problems, frankly, we just have to live with, and we're going to have to live with some criticism on the thing. But I think it is important that we get this launched and at least started in this direction.
One technical consideration that I would point out is that in the language in subtitles C and D, oftentimes there's employment language that's used, and I would look very carefully at that to change words like employ to engage, so you mute the notions of an employer-employee relationship where you really don't have an employer-employee relationship.
Okay. And let me just add, I'm going to ask Lisa Montgomery and Brian Kennedy from my staff to go over all your testimony in detail so that we have your suggestions. I can't guarantee we're going to take all of them. One of the problems, there are a lot of ideas that I'd like to do. It's the old line of the best being the enemy of the good. What we have to do is get something that we can pass here, and we're going to do the best we can. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, well, I don't know, it probably hurt you, but anyway.
No, I hope it doesn't